Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where we are, I think, going to change course completely. I reserve the right to return to the Brexit brouhaha if events demand it, or indeed if it just feels wrong to be talking about anything else. But in the meantime, my apologies to Stephen, Lucas and George and Kumar, Joe and Tony and everyone else who's waiting to talk about Brexit. There will be myriad other opportunities in the course of the day on LBC, and thank you so much for your kind words about my own pontifications this morning. I don't think we'll be making a habit of extended monologues. I think they're quite long enough already, but cometh the hour, cometh the spam. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. I think it's important to start with some home truths on my part. I have in the past indulged in the sort of reckless mischief making that I used to think was hilarious. It's kind of a trope of tabloid journalism. And part of me still does think it's hilarious, but when I hear other people doing it as I get older, I find myself running out of patience. The really obvious, lazy appeals to your emotions by saying, oh, they're attacking you, or oh, they're trying to take away your rights, or oh, let's laugh at them, like vegan sausage rolls at Greg's, or perfectly reasonable calls for Easter eggs not to be promoted mercilessly by tills. No one's suggesting they should be taken off sale, but the merciless early promotion of Easter eggs apparently leads more of us to eat more chocolate than is healthy. So don't stop selling Easter eggs, but stop promoting it mercilessly without any rival voices. So, you know, every day I could open up the newspaper and find a story with which I could very lazily and very predictably and very deliberately make you cross, okay? Foie gras doesn't fall into that category, I don't think. But I was guilty in the past of perhaps ramping up my enthusiasm for it because I know all too well the scale of the reaction it gets. One of my oddest ever experiences on Twitter, and I have had a lot of very odd experiences on Twitter, was with a perfectly pleasant chap who used to be in ever-decreasing circles. I forget his name, but he's still a very successful actor, and he was livid with me, absolutely livid. And he was right and I was wrong. It is cruel, this. Well, I don't know I ever denied it was cruel, but I may have slightly exaggerated my enthusiasm for this delicacy. I've eaten it in my life probably fewer than 10 times, and 2 or 3 of those times were in France, where it is not served up exclusively in very posh restaurants. You can get fresh foie gras in France from relatively humble roadside restaurant, and I've done that as well. If I'm in a fancy restaurant and it's on the menu, it's not a given that I'll order it. I'm rather partial to cod cheeks at the moment. I'm just going to get attacked now by the cod cheek preservation front, aren't I? But if cod cheeks are on the menu in a restaurant, that at the moment is the thing I find it very, very, very hard to resist. And if you're ever in the Norfolk village of Stanhope and you're lucky enough to get a table at the Duck Inn and you don't order the cod cheeks if they're on the menu that day, then you, my friend, are a mug. Unless you don't like fish. So I've been mischievous in the past by pretending not to understand the arguments against foie gras and possibly ramping up my own enthusiasm for the foie gras dish. But I haven't been dishonest. I do really like it, and I will still order it. And this is where I'd like to use myself as a guinea pig, because I know I know it's not right. I'm eating less meat than ever before. Caitlin Moran wrote a brilliant piece at the weekend in her Times magazine column about pigs' backsides and how she'd always been a very proud meat eater, and by that she meant I was absolutely clear about what I was eating and what I was putting in my mouth. But once you start thinking of a pig as sentient and susceptible to suffering, the idea that pig should die so that we can slice its buttocks off and put them in our sandwiches is rather hard to sustain. So what do? Only reference to Brexit, okay? What do? We close our eyes, we put our fingers in our ears, we carry on eating bacon, and we deny the reality of bacon. And I do that. Foie gras should be almost impossible to countenance, because although there are arguments about just how cruel and painful it is for the duck or the goose to have a tube shoved down their throat so that grain can be poured in unchewed right into the gut in the hope of enlarging the liver to such a degree that it becomes almost silk-like in its smoothness and, forgive me, deliciousness. But I know I'll order it again one day. And I'm interested in two things today. 03456060973. I'm interested in you telling me what changed you. So you listen to this and you think, oh yeah, I used to be like that, but I changed. So I know some of the arguments, but I'd love to hear the actual experiences. No, it doesn't have to be specific to foie gras. I'll tell you in a minute why we're talking about this today. There's been another protest, another story in the news, and it's quite, forgive me, funny. There's also a humourlessness to the protesters usually in these sort of stories that I think adds to the sense people like me have that this is an opportunity to make mischief and to poke fun at very po-faced, often holier-than-thou individuals. But again, that makes me a bad one, not them. So I'd love you to tell me what the next chapter is in this story. So you recognise what I'm describing because it used to be you. Hey, James is right. I spent years knowing deep down I shouldn't have been eating that stuff. But I carried on eating it because it was really nice. And then you somehow found the switch to flick, to move to the other side. I can't find it. I really can't. I never feel any moral... I never feel it at the table. I feel it here now, talking to you, right? But at the table... I never feel it. I never feel the vaguest misgiving about ordering a big juicy steak. Or, in the context of foie gras, ordering a nice mousseline. Oh. So, what's going on? Why am I such a fraud? 0345 6060 It's in the news today because a rather splendid-sounding French chef called Clément Leroy was besieged by protesters at his Michelin-starred restaurant in central London yesterday, with activists branding him a criminal for serving foie gras. I love this guy because he thought he'd be able to win them round. He decided that what he'd do is go and show them the quality of the ducks that they serve in his restaurant. Because you presumably are aware of the hierarchy of vegetarianism stroke veganism and the existence of people like me and my family who, although half of us still eat meat, we're quite careful about where it's come from. I don't know yet whether that's like a fig leaf on the hypocrisy. Does it really matter if that pig grew up in a acorn-strewn field in the New Forest, gambling gaily through the glades with his little piggy friends? Does it really matter how nice his life was if it ends because I'm hungry? I don't know, to be honest with you. But I do know that I'll eat ham again and bacon. Oh, and pork belly with crispy crackling. Who just salivated? Any vegetarians? So he didn't wave the ducks to taunt the vegans, this bloke. He took the ducks out to show them that the ducks he was selling were top-dollar ducks. There's a lovely, lovely line in this, and it's probably partly to do with the language barrier. But I don't know if it's going to tickle you as much as it tickles me. But the last word in this sentence, it just brings me joy. So this is Clément Leroy describing what he did at about 3 o'clock yesterday, 10 minutes after his last customers had left, when these protesters turned up at his restaurant, The Square, in Mayfair. So they had pictures well, let me just read you what he said. He said they were a little bit aggressive, he said. They were screaming in the restaurant, "You're a criminal because you are selling meat. You are selling some foie gras." They were showing us some photos of some animals, of a duck looking sad. No, it's just me. How does a duck look sad? Oh, yeah. Quackers. The barman is a vegan. He tried to speak to them. They said, "You're not a true vegan." He added, "I can understand every point of view, but what I don't accept is to come in restaurants to make trouble. For me, it's not democratic." The chef, whose father was a butcher and whose brother is a farmer, did not believe that serving meat or fish was an act of disrespect to animals. When you are a farmer, he said, you have a lot of respect for the animals. I grew up in the middle of animals. And the point was, of course, why he took these ducks to the protesters was, in his own words, far from trying to taunt or upset them, which is what he stands accused of today, he simply wanted to convince them of his support for good animal welfare. I believe him. These ducks are the most expensive in the world. They are from people who have a love for animals. It's not like the picture they showed of the sad duck. So he's gone out to show them that he's using really... What's the phrase they use for well-farmed? Just well-farmed, really carefully cultivated. They're happy ducks. They're dead, but they lived a happy life. And they've responded by yelling and screaming and calling him a criminal. So, 2 questions here. Actually, we've missed someone out of this conversation. I should apologise in advance. I don't need to apologise. I remembered in the nick of time. Can you just give my head a wobble? If you love meat and foie gras, and you're hearing the horrible sound of a once doughty ally leeching support to the other side, can you screw my head back on so that I no longer have misgivings or guilt about guzzling gullets and gizzards and delicious pork crackling? Can you do that? You make the case that there's nothing immoral about it at all. 0345 6060973. But the thing I think that most energises me this morning or this afternoon is that the slightly less fun analysis, which is what made you flip from suspecting stroke knowing it was wrong but doing it anyway into not doing it anymore. 0345 6060973. And in the specific context of foie gras, is there not a little bit of class war tied up in this? Of all the things you could pick on, why not pick on pork scratchings? Why pick on foie gras? OK, it's cruel. But some of those pigs that have been turned into pork scratchings might have been living in piggy squalor. 0345 6060973. This is the last hour we get to spend together this week, so make it a good one. Having a conversation about foie gras in particular, vegetarianism, veganism and meat eating in general. You can say whatever you want, although in a sense it's one of those hours where I ask you to provide me with free therapy. How come I'm such a contradiction? A walking contradiction is that I increasingly know that it's wrong and increasingly accept that it's unjustifiable, but when I'm sitting in a restaurant and I'm handed a menu, never crosses my mind not to look at the meat options. I don't always have them anymore. I used to be one of those geezers who always ordered steak wherever he was, whatever the weather. Steak, because steak in a restaurant just tastes better than you can ever get it to taste at home. But no, I'm more likely to order fish, actually. I went out for a lovely lunch yesterday. I had a piece of yellowfin tuna, since you ask. But why? How can you sustain these 2 contradictory positions in one brain, in one heart? 0345 606. Well, actually, we're full up, so I'll crack on. Jack's in Padstow. Jack, what have you got?
Hey, James. Yeah, I'm a chef by trade. We've spoken before. Fish chef.
Jack Stein.
Hey, how are you?
Should we do some showbiz name dropping?
No, we'll just crack on with the food.
Carry on then.
Non-stop.
Well, I just wanted everyone to know who texted me to say that they were with your dad enjoying some rather fine wines not far from where I live, and I had to come round and join them immediately, but I couldn't because I was being interviewed by the Church Times.
Oh, what, the Chateau Cam evening? Yeah, that was very, very fancy wine indeed.
Carry on.
Foie gras, it just tastes so good. You know,
I know.
It's an ethical dilemma. I mean, there are some farms in Spain doing it ethically, which is a different subject of a discussion. But
it's not necessarily. How do you do it ethically, briefly?
Well, there's a very interesting TED talk by a chef called Dan from America, and he goes there, and basically what the guy provides the geese is everything they need to gavage, which is the word for the force feeding themselves. So
yes.
They just stick around. He makes more money. He'd make more money selling the stuff they eat, the olives and the figs and stuff off his land than he ever does from them. They're just so happy. They're not penned in. They're completely free to roam, and they just gavage themselves. And they end up with yeah. And then he found that he actually won the top foie gras prize in France, and the French were up in arms because he's Spanish and he doesn't use force feeding, and they thought that he was bribing people. Very interesting.
But the quality of the liver was such that he won the award despite not using the pipes.
exactly. Yeah,
Oh, I never.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But I thought, for me, I think it's we're all on a journey. I think, and what chefs and farmers and producers are doing more and more is trying to show us where our food comes from, which is very important. You know, gone are the days when no one knew that chicken was an animal. But actually, I think that whole process, even for me as a confirmed meat eater, I'm trying to eat less. I find it very, very hard when vegan friends of mine who I interact with on social media a lot, because I find it very interesting, start talking about sentient beings and what's the difference between a pig and a dog, or a cow and a cat. You know, and I find that kind of hypocrisy in my own mind difficult to deal with. And actually, the more I know about my animals, the more I source them as best I can. I actually find it harder and harder. And I think that the journey ends in some sort of, you have to make a decision. Meat's delicious. We love meat. A lot of us love meat and fish, and I think probably lab-grown will eventually win out.
Seems to be heading in that direction. But before that dizzy day, you've just highlighted something that I think is worth inflating a little bit. Keith, my colleague, pointed out that in a way, this argument about how we only eat, as you've just done what I do, we're trying to justify ourselves by saying we only eat animals that have had really good lives, that have been really looked after. You could make a much stronger case for saying that you should only eat animals who've had really rubbish lives, because then they get put out of their misery so that you can have lunch. And to go further, if you're really only going to eat the animals that have had the best lives, then really we should be eating our pets. So I'm not sure we can. This is not a fig leaf that's covering much for you and me, Jack.
No, I know, but to be honest, I think the fact that both me and you, who love meat, not ordering that steak every time, and looking at how much meat we get, I think that's where the vegan vegetarian movement needs to focus on. That's the bigger piece of the pie, is to make really hardcore meat eaters drop by 10 or 15% rather than converting the smaller wedge to veganism. I think that's the start, because once you start thinking about it, start thinking about the sentient, you do struggle. And, you know, I still will order a piece of foie gras in a restaurant, but when it's lab grown, I feel a lot better about it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It is the technology will overtake or catch up with the morality, but until that happy day, we continue to wrestle with our consciences. Jack, what's seasonal at the moment? What's on the menu tonight?
I've actually just finished a mussels and wild garlic dish for our pub in Cornwall, so I've just been tasting that with the chef. So delicious, very seasonal.
Oh, get in. Thank you, mate. 24 minutes after 12 is the time. That wild garlic has a smell that's so different from farmed garlic. It can always, what's the word when you see colours? You smell colours. There's a word for it, but it's almost green, the smell of wild garlic, as opposed to that yellowy white smell of farmed garlic. I'm sensing this probably isn't playing out to everybody listening to the programme, my attempts to define the olfactory qualities of wild garlic, but hey, something for everyone. Amber is in Stockbridge. Amber, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, because I can totally understand what you're wrestling with, because I did exactly the same thing. But I have found, I find myself now sort of 4 years a vegan.
Ah, what happened? What was the tipping point, as they say?
So, if I'm completely honest, it was watching Cowspiracy.
Yes.
Which
definitely
helped in the transition.
Is that Simon Amstell's film? No, that's the other one. This is a documentary, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And then they followed it up now with another one called What the Health. Both I think advisable to watch, anybody to watch anyway. But actually, for me, the really big tipping point was my concern for the environment. And I just don't think that eating meat is sustainable. So that was what took me down that road. And I used to be a chef. I worked at the Connaught Hotel in London.
Gosh.
I mean, sort of proper, amazing Michelin-style cooking. Foie gras was one of the great delicacies.
I think I ate it there.
there.
I had a stag weekend when we had the chef's table at the Connaught Hotel, and
Stunning.
Unbelievable food.
Really extraordinary. And I have eaten more than my fair share of foie gras. And if I'm completely honest with you, there are days I still miss it.
I'm sure.
But my concerns for the welfare of our planet as a whole, and of course animal welfare too.
But that's very interesting. It's a shift, isn't it? It reminds me of there's a Republican mayor at the end of Al Gore's last film who becomes a very, very enthusiastic endorser of climate change politics, and because he's seeing the financial impact. So although he's still a massive right-winger, and at the time that the film was made, he still thought Donald Trump was the Messiah, he was buying into flood protections and environmental levies and charges not because he was sort of worried about a nebulous notional threat, but because it had been made very real for him. And that's perhaps how many people arrive at vegetarianism or cut down hugely on meat, not because they've suddenly shifted morally, but because they're recognising the imminent threat of carrying on like we are.
No, I think that's entirely true, and I think that's a feeling that, it doesn't really matter your politics, your religion, anything. I think these days people are increasingly taking a long, hard look at what our impacts are on the planet, and I'm afraid what we eat has arguably the most impact.
Yes, and there's something that we constantly miss, and again, we're managing to keep Brexit largely out of this, but that is, of course, what food standards and regulations are designed to do. Oh, bless. You can't tell anymore whether things are serious or silly, but so, James, do you get wild garlic at the food bank? No, mate. You get it in the wild. It's free. Any other questions? You genius. Colin's in Belton in North Lincolnshire. Colin, what do you think?
I think we should start a band, James. You know the fun-loving criminals?
Yeah, stick them up. I have to just check my language there. I couldn't quite stick them up, punk. It's the fun-loving criminals.
We should form a band called the Meat-Loving Hypocrites.
The Meat-Loving Hypocrites. I'm in. I'll be on drums.
Okay, I've got a challenge for you, mate, and I think it's this. Unlike you, I love meat. But I had that cognitive bit going on as well.
Yeah.
And the thing I do is willful blindness. Because if you said to me, there's your corn burger, and it's all the relish and everything on it, it's all lovely.
Yeah.
There's the cow, kill the cow, and you can have the burger you want.
Yeah.
I need corn burger.
Would you do it yourself?
I don't want to get involved. Yeah. Now, if you think about it, and I'm sorry, but the B word's coming in.
Go on.
This is a bit like Brexit. Now, what you have done for the last 3 years is get the noise.
Oh, we're going to lose the phone line. Go on, carry on.
Okay, we're going to get behind the noise of the lies that we were being fed.
Yes.
So that means, and we've exposed it. And as a result, we change our beliefs around it. I think what I'm not doing, I think you might be guilty as well, is that we're not getting really behind. And I don't want to see it. I don't want to see the videos. I don't want to see all the stuff that's going on, because I know if I did...
Yeah. You wouldn't be able to sustain the dissonance. You'd have to...
Tell you what, James, if you do some research and start to share the facts on how the food is produced, how it's slaughtered, and all that kind, and get underneath it.
I'd hear you.
I'll go veg with you, mate.
All right, but I need to be aware of various other considerations and variables as well, of course. But you make a point. The problem is I've got to have some areas of my life where I'm still a hypocrite. Otherwise, I'd be unbearable. Speaking of unbearable, there's 15 minutes left for you to bid for the champagne signed by the superstar of breakfast television, Susanna Reid, and me. If you head over to eBay, it's quite easy to find. It's still a bargain, I think. 320 quid for a massive is it a Magnum? It's more than a normal size bottle, and there's some delicious truffles inserted into a drawer out underneath the champagne box. So not only that, but when you finish the champagne, you've got Susanna and my autographs forevermore on a massive bottle. So head over there now and see if you can ramp up the price by a few more quid. Anyone who thought Dominic Raab couldn't get any more ridiculous? Bad news. It turns out he's going to vote for the deal that he helped to negotiate but doesn't support. This according to sources. I think he's speaking in the House of Commons at the moment. Just when you think things can't get any madder, they get madder. You know, I get asked a lot what I think's going to happen, and as you know, for the last few weeks I've been saying I just don't know. But if you were to take the temperature of Brexit, if you were to take the madness of it and the utter duplicity of many parliamentarians, not just the weapons-grade hypocrites like Johnson and Rees-Mogg and now Raab, Ian Duncan-Smith, the people who have described the deal as being worse than being a member, that seems to me to be the most apt conclusion. So I don't want to scare you, but I don't think it's a given that this withdrawal agreement is going to get defeated. Not when you look at the calibre of the human beings contemplating either changing their previously established position or voting against the national interest because of personal interest, whether they are worried about losing their seat or whether they're worried about something else. I just can't. I hesitate to say this. I almost wish I'd never said it out loud. But if Brexit were to reach its apotheosis, then it would have to be something that has been described as worse than remaining by the key Brexiters, wouldn't it? That's the only thing that, in a sense, would make sense of the madness. It would have to be the maddest possible conclusion to an episode of utter madness. What's the maddest possible conclusion, if it happened, to an episode of utter madness? Answer, Brexit turning out to be something that the people who caused Brexit have described as worse than being in the European Union. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If it was in a textbook 20 years hence, I'd be absolutely riveted and laughing my socks off. But it's not. It's our lives and our children's, and it's not funny at all. Back to meat, vegetarianism and foie gras, and the increasingly frenzied contortions of people like me to justify doing something that is almost impossible to justify. So how do you do it then? Well, I just don't think about it very often until a story like this comes along. A chef, I think in good faith, greeting protesters at his restaurants complaining about him serving foie gras by showing him a couple of lovely ducks that had lived lives of untrammelled duckish luxury. Gemma's in New York. Gemma, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Gemma.
So I have kind of mad life, my own. I'm vegetarian, and my husband is a barbecue chef.
Yes. Well, as a job?
I've listened to you. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I've listened to you for many, many years, and I've heard how you've softened towards vegetarianism, and I'm proud of you, to be honest.
Thank you.
I think your comment about eating your own pet, that's where you're going to be. We have 5 children, and I think my proudest moment was when we were at the Bronx Zoo, and my then 5-year-old walked past the wild turkey. It was close to Thanksgiving, and I was like, "Oh, look, guys, it's a turkey. That's great, Mum. Can we take that home for Abba to kill?" I'm like, as long as you guys are comfortable with that, and that's what you want to do, you can catch it. You can ask the guys at the zoo, and we can take them home. But I don't think we take this one. And that's what I think we need to do. You need to be raising people who have that sort of consciousness.
Yes.
And at some point, that pit in your stomach is going to be too much, and you can either eat it, your foie gras, and enjoy it, or I can't. I've never eaten my husband's barbecue. I have no intention of eating a cow.
What about fish?
So here's I never ate fish until I was pregnant with my first, and I did, and I still do, and I cook it, and I've killed it, and I'm okay with that.
Why?
So if you can do that, and you can be comfortable with that.
No, but why are you okay with fish? You don't catch all the fish you eat.
So I don't catch all my fish, and I source it reliably, and in terms of the environmental impact, that's important too. They actually have a different central nervous system.
They do, and in fact, isn't there an argument that vegans could theoretically eat snails or arthropods, something that doesn't have any sort of spine, or I don't remember the details, but is there not a bit of hair splitting going on? Because I know you rang in to give me a lesson in hypocrisy and double standards, but I mean, fish lives matter.
I'm proud of you. Fish lives do matter. But everybody has their own moral compass as to where they can start or stop.
And do you and your husband just agree not? Is it like politics and religion? It's one of the things that you agree never to discuss together.
I think all of those are on our table, things we don't discuss, and I still love him.
Fair enough. If I'm ever in New York, I look forward to a VIP seat at his barbecue table, unless I've reached that point where the pit in my stomach no longer allows me to contemplate carnivorous conduct. But I told you I was in a very alliterative mood today. Gemma, thank you so much, and thank you for your pride. And you're right. I mean, just in terms of environmental impact, my footprint is a fraction of what it would have been back in the day. I can't even eat a double burger anymore. This is old age, isn't it? I used to be one of those lads who'd order the burger that had everything in it, like at the Little Chef. Do you remember the ones at the Little Chef? I mean, before all these burger chains became so popular. But now it just doesn't... the thing that really gets me going is a lovely piece of fish, actually, more so than a lovely piece of meat, until you bring in the accoutrements like the crispy crackling or the foie gras. Daniel's in Aylesbury. Daniel, what do you think?
I'm a livestock farmer and a meat eater.
Yes.
And my point is that we need We need meat production. We need livestock farming, because the byproduct of that is the manure which we use to grow crops and grow plants. And not only to say that, but it's perfectly environmentally friendly farming livestock, because the green spaces that we use to graze them are some of the biggest carbon stores in the country. You know, globally, soil and the ocean are the two biggest carbon stores. Now, if we start ploughing up that grassland that we were using for grazing livestock to create, you know, to produce nutrient-dense protein through the meat, then I don't think the public would be very happy with the beautiful green spaces that it affords, and B, it would have a huge negative impact on our farming system.
Because of the land management. It's actually not a bad point, in the sense that if it wasn't for farmers, the countryside would be a jungle. That's essentially what you're saying.
That, and yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with some managed jungle areas. You know, it's fine to have some, reserves and areas that are untouched by man, but yeah, I mean, certainly...
Cultivation is the word. It's cultivated, our countryside, and it wouldn't be if the farm... Well, you would still be growing crops and stuff, but and you could still grow them without animal fertiliser. Come on, Dan.
Well, yeah,
I wasn't born yesterday, mate. I listened to the Archers.
So you want to use more synthetic and chemical fertiliser?
No, we're going to use seaweed.
Yeah, well, and in actual fact, this is the point.
I know.
Science is catching up, because farmers... There are studies where farmers feed seaweed to their livestock, and it's proven that it reduces the eructation of methane from those animals. And
but you can also get fertiliser that's seaweed based. I could cut the animal waste products out of the equation entirely, couldn't I?
Not really. I mean,
of course I could.
The cost of harvesting that seaweed and putting it into fertiliser hasn't caught up with...
Not yet. So progress is... I don't want, obviously, you to be in any way damaged or doomed as a livelihood, and indeed as a farmer. I grew up on a farm. A lot of my friends in Worcestershire are farmers. But I do wonder whether the clock is ticking, actually, regardless of the power of your arguments, and just a sense of, A, lab-grown meat being a huge growth area, if you pardon the pun, and B, the increasing sense of environmental damage inflicted by livestock farming and consumption.
Well, like I said, I personally see livestock farming as a solution to our carbon footprint. You know, because
I've got a zinger here, unfortunately.
Oh yeah.
You ready?
Go on.
I think you'll find that the majority of food crop space grown in the world is actually used to feed cattle.
I think that's a misquoted statistic, because
maybe
a lot of the grain...
It's not Brexit, so I'm not taking it to the bank. If it was a Brexit fact, I'd fight you on the beaches. But when it comes to food crops, I'm happy to be corrected by a farmer.
A lot of the grain we produce doesn't meet the quality through environmental, you know, in a particularly dry summer like last year. A lot of the grain quality we produce, the quality of the grains wasn't up to spec to make bread, to make biscuits, to make cereals, and so it drops down a level and then becomes animal feed.
Right, maybe
so yeah, you're
in
right.
Your case.
We do feed grains to livestock, but it's a waste product. It's determined as a bit of a waste product from the farming system.
I get it, of course. Although, of course, you could have just turned it all into vodka.
And the final point I finished on with your researcher when he was rushing me through was that at the end of the day, I'm a farmer. You know, if society deems that farming is livestock meat eating is socially unacceptable, fine. We'll plough up some of our grass fields and we'll start trying to grow carrots or plant-based foods, but I can guarantee 100% that the public will not be very happy with that.
No, and that's why I think if there is a change on the way, it's going to be incremental. It's going to be baby steps rather than massive strides. And you know, you speak to someone like Daniel, a farmer, and you can't then bring yourself to wish harm upon him or damage to his business. And that is where I do depart quite violently from the kind of people that turn up at restaurants and indeed farm shops protesting about the sale of meat products, whether it's the fancy pants foie gras or whether it's pork scratchings. 12 for cheers, Daniel. Have a good weekend. Back to the field. We had a call yesterday from a bloke on a tractor. I don't know why I mentioned that. I think I'm very conscious of when Alan Partridge upset the farmers and it all went very, very wrong for him. Always keen to keep the farmers on side. Some breaking news. Dominic Raab has rendered himself even more ridiculous than when he blocked a well-known journalist for tweeting film of Dominic Raab speaking Dominic Raab's words. Theo Usherwood is here with the exclusive.
The former Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, said in November when he resigned that Theresa May's deal was worse than remaining in the European Union.
Well, I'm not going to advocate staying in the EU, but if you just presented me terms, this deal or EU membership, because we'd effectively be bound by the same rules but without the control or voice over them, yes, I think this would be even worse than that.
Now, Dominic Raab has just changed his mind.
In all of this, however frustrating, I believe we need to proceed with some realism. Yeah. The choice now is between the risk of being held in the backstop by the EU for a period without being able to control our exit, and on the other hand, a significant risk of losing Brexit altogether. Neither are palatable. Both could have been avoided if the government had shown the requisite resolve and will. And I appreciate that for many colleagues, this presents a very finely balanced judgment call. I share the deep frustrations many feel at being presented with two such unsavoury alternatives. Mr. Speaker, anger is not a political strategy.
We should just remind our listeners that Dominic Raab was in the cabinet between
it's worse than
July.
That, mate. Dominic Raab is voting for the deal he negotiated and then resigned in order to oppose.
Yes. He's voting for it now. But you have to see...
Carry on.
You have to see this through the prism of a Conservative leadership election. They're jockeying for position. The number of ERG, European Research Group, who are opposing the deal is now down to around 25. If Dominic Raab is going to go up against somebody like Boris Johnson, who is now in favour of the deal, he needs to still win over a bulk of Conservative MPs, and he doesn't need to be seen as being disloyal. Then, of course, it will go to the party membership, and it will now be a straight knife fight between him and Mr Johnson if they were both to make it. He hasn't done his credentials any harm in the membership.
In Parliament. But in the country he has. Surely the Conservative membership think everyone should be hanging on for unicorns.
But he's taken the calculation that in order to get to that final stage, he is only going to go up against somebody who has supported the deal.
Yes, no, of course he has. I mean, this is designed entirely to advance his ambitions.
Yes.
Absolutely nothing to do with the country or the national interest. No. But he has. I mean, we've been quite honest about Dominic Raab lately. This is a major contribution to the gaiety of the nation, isn't it? This is up there with Eric Morecambe.
It's not funny, James.
It's hilarious. Dominic Raab is voting for the deal he negotiated and then resigned in order to oppose.
Yes. That's
beautiful. That's like a haiku of political bonkersness. It's like a, what's it called when you unfold a cube? A tesseract. A tesseract of hypocrisy and duplicity. Voting for the deal he negotiated and then resigned in order to oppose.
He's supporting it.
A certain type of Tory will be doffing their cap and tugging their forelock and wondering whether maybe he's all right as well, like Boris and Jacob. So to be clear, Johnson, Rees-Mogg and Raab all voting for something they have publicly described as being inferior to retaining our membership of the European Union.
That is correct.
And that would be the most apt conclusion to this whole sorry saga. How likely is it now?
The numbers are going in the government's favour, but Labour insisting that there will not be a significant rebellion to get them over the line, of course.
DUP standing firm?
DUP standing firm, a cohort of around, as I said, 20 to 25 members of the ERG, including Mark Francois, standing firm.
I saw him on time. I don't normally do this, but my Lord, he's small. Have you seen him?
Yeah, I see him regularly.
He's titchy.
It's not, but that's got nothing to do with his policies.
I disagree. Some of my best friends are very short. I want to make that absolutely clear. But there is something called small man syndrome. And when you see people on the telly and you can't see their size and they're banging on about the war and having been in the army when he just spent a few wet weekends in the territorials, and then you see that he's a little stumpy fella, I think it makes sense. They're always tiny, these angry people.
I don't know.
Well, apart from Rees-Mogg, he's enormous. Theo Usherwood, many thanks indeed. The madness continues to unfold live on LBC throughout the afternoon, where Sheila Fogarty will be marshalling Theo Usherwood into yet more coruscating coverage of the national chaos we call Brexit. And you did hear correctly. Dominic Raab has now revealed he will vote for the deal he negotiated and then resigned in order to oppose. That makes me nostalgic for the days of the childish wish lists. Glenn's in Queen's Park to steer us back to matters meaty. Glenn, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'd just like to say that I think the narrative about the environmental issues regarding meat eating are completely wrong. And in fact,
they're quite strong. I mean, you know, in terms of how much grain is grown to feed animals, those kind of narratives.
I agree that practice is wrong. Growing grain to feed animals that don't naturally eat it, transporting it to them and keeping them in conditions that are unnatural, I would agree with you, is wrong. But allowing cows to eat what they naturally eat, which is grass, allowing their stomachs to ferment that grass for their own nutrition, can actually be done in a way that's carbon negative.
I like it.
So
I'm still going to struggle with the idea that the cow should die to provide me with a delicious steak.
What about if that cow is also regenerating landscape and sequestering carbon and methane into the soil and reducing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere?
I wish I could ask the cow.
But the point is that no meal is free of death. I mean, monocropping agriculture is probably the greatest habitat destruction that we have on this planet.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you are not just an impartial amateur observing from the sidelines.
I am not. I'm a co-founder of a startup which is involved in ethical meat production, and I'm a 25 years ex-vegetarian.
Oh, really? How fascinating!
So
who's doing your PR? That'd be a great interview. You should be in the Standard. Where's the? Are you based? Is the business in Queen's Park?
No, we've only just finished crowdfunding, so we've got about 6 months before we actually get up and running. But we're hoping to sort of generate some press and we get going.
Well, let me know. I'll put you in touch with someone. Seriously, I know just the person to look after you. Let me get in touch on Twitter or via email or just badger Beth next week, my producer, and because I like the sound of that. And Glenn's the only one who's risen to the challenge of trying to wobble my head back out of my encroaching vegetarianism and giving me the shoes that I need, not, I'm afraid, vegan shoes, giving me the leather sandals that I need to march back towards the days when I could put away a pile of foie gras without even blinking. Before we go, I just want to draw something to your attention, all right? Because there's two gentlemen doing a sponsored swim this weekend who deserve your support. Thank you for all your bids on that champagne, which raised money for Global's Make Some Noise. This is a charity raising money for it's a swimathon raising money for the Grenfell Foundation, and David Badillo and Manny Ruiz are the ones doing it. You know who they are, even if you don't recognise the names. God, it still gets me, this one. David was the firefighter photographed kissing the cheek of a man who was, we later discovered, mourning a relative's death in Grenfell. So David and Manny, who knew each other before the tragedy, are swimming together to raise money for the Grenfell Foundation. They're not far off their total of $3,500. They're currently on 2,940, but I know you, and I know that we've been doing this for a very long time, and I know as I glance at the clock and see that I've got 5 seconds left, I know that by the time I get home to Chiswick, where hopefully I'll be able to see the stragglers on Nigel's little march that Nigel isn't on, I know it will have hit the 3,500 mark. So go to the Just Giving website and look for Swim for Grenfell and throw these two lads a couple of quid, because my goodness me, not only do they deserve your support, but the charity that they are supporting, as we discovered yet again this week, still has a heck of a lot of work to do.